All right, even less than that. I will call the Oregon School District Board of Education meeting for July 10th, 2017 to order at 6:32 PM at the Oregon School District Innovation Center. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney. Ms. Odorico. Here. Ms. Flanagan. Here. Mr. Raymond. Mr. Kraus.
Yo.
Mr. LeBrun.
Here.
Mr. Zott.
Present. And Mr. Raymond indicated to me some time ago that this week he's on a trip with his son looking at colleges, so he's excused from the meeting. I have proof that the board has a quorum, and I have proof that the meeting has been appropriately noticed pursuant to Wisconsin open meetings law, and those notices will be with Ms. Wick if anyone wants to examine them. The agenda tonight, there are two subtractions from what has been posted. We will not be working on action item D1, the contract with United Way this evening. That's not completed, or the easement for Alliance. So we'll remove those, and I understand those will be on the agenda for our August meeting. With those changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Mr. LeBrun with the motion, Dan with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. We have an approved agenda to govern us this evening. Consent calendar, A. Is there any item on the consent calendar that any board member wishes for removal for any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion. And you should have at your desk an orange sheet with an updated staffing assignments. Seeing no request to remove anything from the consent calendar, I'd entertain a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar. Is there a motion? Ms. Feeney with the motion, Ms. Odorico with the second. I would note that we have a number of donations. Oregon Rotary has two donations, one for $350 for Brooklyn that went to mulch and other products for, I think, their playground and outdoor area, and then $300 for Lerner Park. The Brunig Foundation had a $3,000 grant to Brooklyn Elementary, significant. Oregon Community Bank and Trust had a program where they would provide funds to designated charities for people who open to accounts, and Prairie View got $200 from that through Donna Fossler. The Paraground Playground Fund had significant contributions from a number of folks that I'm not going to read through all of them, but we thank all of those folks for their work with Prairie View. And then the Splash Pad has two donations, one of $400 for Michael and Laura Reese and $50 for Tim and Laura Brown. So we thank all those folks for their generous contributions to the district and their support of the district. Having a motion and a second, and we have contracts. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney. Yes. Ms. Odorico. Yes. Ms. Flanagan. Yes. Mr. Kraus.
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun.
Yes.
Mr. Zott.
Yes, motion carries 6-0 for the items on the consent calendar. Item B on our agenda is communication from the public pursuant to Board Policy 18004. The board offers the public an opportunity to address the board. We've established 15 minutes for that. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board this evening? Any member of the public who is here to address the board? Any member of the public to address the board? Seeing no one, we'll move to item C and the informational items, and I don't see anyone from the OEA, and we're in the interim of our student representatives, so we'll finish up item C rather quickly. Takes us to action items D2, 27 academic standards. Brian, is that yours or Leslie's? This is something that we have to do pursuant to state statute.
Yes, I can do this real quickly. Leslie and Gina prepared D2, and you'll recall this is a state standard change that was made a couple of state budgets ago, and annually school boards are required to approve our academic standards for the school year. You'll notice in the report, part of our Build Your Own Curriculum, BYOC, you've heard us use that phrase before, it is attached here. It's also live on our website. Our recommendation pursuant to Section 120 of the statutes is for the board to approve the attached list we have and description of the student academic standards in the areas of math, science, reading and writing, geography, history, and that will be in effect during the 2017-18 school year. We can certainly add more information, and I know Leslie would have a ton of information to share if any of you have questions. And Gina prepared this part to make sure that we are statutorily compliant.
And Gina, this would put us in compliance with the requirements of the state statutes, right?
Yes.
Okay. Does any board member have any questions about our adoption of academic standards? It's similar to what we've done last year. Mr. Kraus?
Yeah, I just had a question as to, has this changed at all since last year?
Not in a material sense.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the academic standards that are set forth in our documents before us this evening and as are publicized on the district website. Got a motion from Ms. Flanagan and a second from Mr. Kraus. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Flanagan? Yes. Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Ms. Oderico? Yes.
Yes, that motion carries 6-0, and we have approved academic standards that will be published on the district's website and in compliance with state law. That takes us to action item D3, food pricing for the 2017-2018 school year, an exercise that we undergo every summer. Andy, this is yours, I believe.
It is. With the USDA lunch program, we are required every year to do a fairly easy analysis, which we do in October. We can do actually. The USDA program requires us to do an analysis every October for the following school year. And when we had all the data in from October of 2016, we were about 14 cents shy of where we needed to be as far as our lunch prices. If you recall, last year we were not nearly that far off. In fact, we just had to raise one of our lunch prices in order to get into compliance. We could take our prices up the full 14 cents if we wanted to, but we have to take it up the minimum of 10 cents, which is what's required by the USDA. So that's what we're recommending. We are, not quite to our audit process yet. We're still getting in bills and those types of things from June 30th. But from what we're looking at right now, we appear to have a positive situation or financial situation after the 16-17 school year. So what we're recommending is to do the minimum as far as amount of an increase into our lunch program this year, which is a 10 cents increase. We are not required to do anything with breakfast, so we left breakfast at the same price. We're pretty competitive with breakfast, maybe a little bit on the high side compared to other districts. So we thought that'd be good to stay there. And milk, we're doing fine with milk pricings at the 40 cents. So we kept those two prices the same and then raised everything else to 10 cents as required. So we're just recommending that you increase those prices by 10 cents so we can start getting the free and reduced lunch applications and those types of things out to our families. That's, I guess, a component of the application is what the prices are.
Any board member have any questions about the recommendation from the administration regarding food pricing for 2017-2018? Look at Krista.
This is just an informational question. So these prices are for students that are not eligible for free and reduced lunch. So then with free and reduced lunch, is this what's billed back in terms of the cost of that? How does, do these prices have any assignment to a free and reduced lunch cost?
No, they don't.
Okay.
I'm curious about what we do in the way of collecting on debts that students and parents owe if their kids eat the lunch and they haven't paid.
That is something that we have honestly struggled with for years. We actually have a policy that we're going to be working on that's required. The federal government said that a number of districts were going into the negative because they weren't collecting these fees. They don't necessarily say you have to collect the fees, but they're saying you have to have a policy to deal with it. The position I've taken as a business manager is we do have uncollected debt. This is over $1 million program, and our uncollected debt, I think, typically runs between $6,000 and $8,000 a year, and it doesn't grow. It kind of stays about right what that amount is. So we haven't put a tremendous amount of energy into it. I will tell you that we've been using Orchards funds, and then we've actually had the Friends of Oregon School District offer as well, but we're using Orchard funds at this point in time to help those families who qualify for free and reduced lunch to kind of forgive those balances. And then based on information from the principals, if there's other families that may not require or may not qualify for free and reduced lunch, we'd be open to using those funds to kind of help those families to remove those balances as well. I can tell you we don't deny a kid a lunch even if they aren't free and reduced lunch. And so a lot of times that's why we have these balances is we still do charge, because if we charge them, we at least get the state and the federal portion of a paid lunch. So there's a small amount of money that we get for our paid lunches as well. And so if we didn't charge the family, we wouldn't get that revenue. So we do charge them, and that's how these negative balances come about. Does that kind of make sense? Or at least answer your question?
If you could just, I'm not familiar with the Orchard Fund, and also regarding the debts, are they ever turned over to a debt collector or anything like that?
The first answer is Orchards is the funds that we've been getting, so many $1,000s per school, and off the top of my head, I don't remember if it's $3,000 or $4,000, $5,000.
It's in that $4,000 to $5,000 range, and that's the federal project we're working on with the CDC and locally with Dr. John Tempty on flu. It's a flu and cold study, and I think we're in year 3, and the CDC is contemplating extending us for another 3 years.
So that's been our major funding source to help kind of families in need so far. We also have the Friends of Oregon that are helping as well. So we have kind of 2 sources of revenue for that. Your second question was, I've forgotten it already.
Do we turn it over to?
Oh, do we? We have not done that. When I first got here, we used to turn it over to a debt collection agency that basically just sent letters that got increasingly more threatening. And I'd say that's probably similar with other districts, but they never actually took anybody to small claims court or anything. So we have not done that.
That's good, I think. Okay. Thanks.
Good.
Any other questions, Tim?
So how do we communicate that there's a growing debt? I'm assuming we communicate that.
To the parents?
Yes.
So a couple ways. The easiest way is we have an automated process that somebody has to initiate, but there's the email system that goes out for Infinite Campus. Then we do have some people that don't have email, and we do phone calls. I think we still mail statements to those families that we do not have email. As the debt grows, we do reach out to the schools to see if they can help us as well. Sometimes district phone number isn't always answered when we call folks, so we try to use other means to try to get a hold of folks to see if we can help or if they can fill out the free and reduced lunch application. But that is a difficult thing. There are a lot of people that are not really wanting that to do that.
Any other questions? If not,
That we approve the 10-cent increase for lunch prices for next year.
as set forth in the document, because I don't think we're doing 10 cents across the board, but just at the, just for those 4 levels, K4, 5, 8, 9, 12, and adult.
Yes.
Yep, and then the rest would stay the same. Is there a second to that motion? Mr. LeBrun with the second. Any discussion? Andy, one question I had is that, but for the federal requirement of upping our prices 10 cents, would we be moving up? Or do you think we would, maybe a nickel?
Yeah, I'd say probably a little bit less than 10 cents
Okay.
would be my guess.
My second comment is that it's good to see that we've developed a fund balance because we do utilize that for purchasing of capital equipment. So while it looks like we're accumulating a balance, the purpose of that is so that we help self-fund not only the operational costs of the program, but also the fixed long-term costs of the program, which would include equipment. So
Yeah.
that's why we accumulate that. And we were really concerned a few years ago where we were really losing our fund balance and we're facing the prospect of having to build into our operating budget the purchase of capital equipment. So
Yep.
it's nice to see us on a trend. And I'll note that we've been averaging a 7 cents increase over the last 5 years, which is pretty modest given circumstances. So, yep.
Andy, I'm just curious with the requirement with the school lunch program to raise the minimum cost, is there a nutritional or quality component to that as well? So, you're raising the price, but your quality has to maintain a certain standard or
Yeah,
improve?
it definitely has to maintain. A question, the word improve can be subjective. When you start talking about taste compared to health benefits, I think we've gotten, there was, this is not my area of expertise, but I think we've gotten a little bit of flexibility with sodium because we were supposed to be heading toward less and less sodium, but I think we got held kind of at where we are now just because the companies that make the food has to kind of adjust, and then our children's palates have to kind of adjust a little bit too, so that they continue to at least eat. So there's kind of a little dance going on there, but right now, yeah, there is a certain standard, and we can't go backwards for where we are.
Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second with respect to raising food prices for 2017, 2018 by 10 cents for 4 levels, and then holding them for breakfast and milk. Ms. Wick, would you, let's call the roll on this one.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Ms. Oderico? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Zopp?
Yes, motion carries. Thank you, Andy. Next item on the agenda is from policy, and it's policy 336, acceleration. And I believe that's Ms. Flanagan.
Yeah, I'll just point out a couple things, and then if people have questions, I or Gina can jump in to answer. Just a couple things on this acceleration policy. It's now the Advanced Learner Program, and acceleration may include subject acceleration or grade acceleration. So those are kind of the two different things in terms of if a student, for example, is in 4th grade and maybe at a 6th grade level in math. So that would be subject acceleration, and then grade level would be a whole grade level. This also goes through kind of the referral process, and we were really happy to hear from Amy Miller talking about that it really involves a parent, student, school psychologist, school administrator, the advanced learner coordinator. So it's really an engaged process with everyone that's involved to really assess if the student should be a part of the advanced learner program. And that the other thing too is that they use the Iowa Acceleration Scale, which evaluates social, emotional functioning, intellectual functioning, achievement, and aptitude. So it's a pretty robust policy, and so if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Barb?
So, just from my understanding, it seems like acceleration at the high school would look a little bit different than acceleration at the other grades, just in that students choose their courses to some extent. I'm just trying to understand how that works.
I'll answer a couple things, then Gina can jump in. From what I understand is acceleration is, or advanced learning is really more assessed at an earlier age, in terms of that's when students are tested or the conversations happen, and so as they continue their acceleration, that continues into high school. And so it is apparent in high school, but the assessment and the changes occur most often in lower grades. And I don't know, Gina, if you want to jump in, if that answers your question, or if in high school it's not as readily available because kids are choosing different courses or AP courses or those sorts of things.
Any other questions? I've got several. One is more of a broad-based question. And at what point in time will we no longer need this policy because we're in personalized learning? That you could see that coming a mile away, right? You probably asked that question.
Actually, Amy brought that up, and we did talk about that the dream is that this policy will no longer be in existence, because as we move toward our vision of each learner learns at their own pace and is studying at the level that they need, we won't really need to have an advanced learner program because we're personalized learning.
I was confused by, maybe not confused, I don't understand how the process begins, because in 33605, it talks about the acceleration referral process begins when a teacher, or it says staff, and I had a question whether staff means teacher, because we're using them interchangeable. I think we need to be consistent, but when a teacher notices that the student is needing some extensions, but then in the next sentence it's say that a parent or guardian can also begin the process. And so I wasn't clear about how this process works, one. Two, that we've got 33606 that talks about using the IOL acceleration scale, and then we've got this team that gets assembled. I don't know what they discuss or what they look at, when the testing fits into that scheme. And then, because as I was looking through the administrative guidelines, it seems like there's a determination level that I didn't see involve the team or a reference to the team. And so I was confused about where the team fits in, the timing of that with the testing, and then what specifically the decision-making process is. I understand that the district holds the responsibility for making the decision ultimately, but I wasn't clear of that process.
As far as the process goes, I think it says here on 33605 is the, is that right? The student may be referred for acceleration by a school district professional or a parent or guardian. And I think that's very important, is that the parent or guardian can call and ask for the process to begin, as well as the teacher can based on his or her observations. So the process is started by either, or in some cases when the student is a little bit older, the student, him or herself, is the initiator of the process. And then once we've decided we're moving forward, there are a series of data pieces that are collected and are collectively examined. So it's never just one assessment. It's multiple assessments in addition to classroom performance, in addition to social emotional situations. So every child is treated very much as an individual, even though there are guidelines there to help us. But sometimes, each child is their very own special and unique person, and we have to do what's right for this particular child, and the test scores don't always tell the whole story.
Where does the testing fit in, and how's that different from the Iowa acceleration scale?
I'm not familiar with the Iowa acceleration scale because that's something that's primarily used by the advanced learning group. But what we would look at as a collective whole, in addition to that piece of data, would be things like several years of STAR data or MAP data if they've already moved out of STAR because their scores have been 1,000 points or more 2 times in a row on the math section. Or we look at examples of their classroom work. And sometimes when the scores don't tell the whole story and the student feels very strongly about wanting this challenge, we ask the student to put together a portfolio to show us what type of work do you do in order to make sure that it really is the student who is interested and is driving it, especially in the middle grades.
If I, but yeah, they seem to conflict with me, is that we've got the guidelines 336.10.7 says within 10 days of testing, the advanced learner teacher coordinator contacts classroom teachers and administrator for approval of alternative curriculum program, which has nothing to say about assessing the Iowa acceleration scale. It has nothing to say about the team that's put together a discussion. It's got a 10-day period of time that we do the test and we make a decision, as I read that.
Well, we did ask that question because we did ask as part of the acceleration policy that, as I understand it, and I could be wrong, that the Iowa acceleration scale is talking about when you're talking about full grade acceleration, which is really a small percentage of students involved in our acceleration policy. The large majority of students involved in advanced learner program are subject acceleration.
Okay, I think that needs.
That's correct.
I think that needs to be clearer in here. My thought would be to send it. I've got a bunch of edits, so I don't know if this is time sensitive, Krista or
No.
Leslie. I got a couple other points in
Because
here to clarify.
33606 says the first sentence is when a student is being considered for full grade acceleration. So I think that's
Yep.
the qualifier to the Iowa acceleration scale.
Yep. Then I think we would need a separate section that talks about when we're talking about subject acceleration and what that process is, because that seems to be missing to me. Gina.
So my question would be, Steve, are you looking for us to modify the policy or the guidelines? Because the guidelines don't need board approval, it's just for information. So if you were looking at the guidelines, we could do that on an administrative level.
I'm thinking if we have something in the policy about the process for considering full grade acceleration, we don't have it for subject matter acceleration, that's in the guidelines. And if one's in the guidelines and one's in the policy, I think both need to be in the policy.
So if what I'm understanding is we just need a section which we potentially could add, or as part of a second paragraph of 33606 that qualifies the difference between full grade acceleration and subject acceleration. What is something that's just saying when a student is being considered for subject acceleration, various data is being gathered that changes the difference or makes the difference between the two.
Yes, because the guidelines then specify some testing and then approval process that doesn't seem to me to play into having this team of folks that are gathered, including the parents.
So could we have the motion that is approved tonight with the acceleration policy, given that statement, that we could add a statement in that regard?
I would prefer it to go back and have it written that way, so that we know what I have a couple other questions. In 33607, there's an appeal right to that, and is there a time that we're going to allow them to appeal? And how is that made? I think we need to specify when that occurs so that we know we close the door. And is that just for full grade acceleration, or is that all of them?
That is for the full grade acceleration.
Yeah.
And it identifies that in that paragraph 33.
Okay, is there an appeal process for grade level acceleration? Or I mean, subject matter acceleration?
I'm not sure how that would really work if you're talking about a subject matter. I'm assuming that you would work with the parents and the student to meet their needs.
We've always been able to come up with something that's mutually agreeable. We haven't even encountered that situation, really.
You know, if we're going to send this back, I think it needs to be clear that only grade level acceleration should be subject to an appeal within a certain time to the superintendent whose decision is final. What's the difference? What would be an example of a procedural concern on that?
It'd be an example if we didn't meet the 10-day, we called a meeting after the 10 days, or we didn't give a test that we said we would give, or something of that nature.
What's the rationale for allowing procedural stuff to go to the board and not stop at the superintendent like non-procedural stuff?
So Amy and Jen felt that we should really mirror we have another policy on grade retention or promotion. And so this language mirrors that language since that was previously approved by the board.
I think that's the only questions that I had. My preference would be to bring it back, but if others think differently, you know, we can bring a motion from the committee. One thing that we should do is be consistent throughout there are sometimes we talk about full grade acceleration, and then it's grade level acceleration, so those have to be consistent throughout. That's all I had.
I have a question, Steve. So is there a reason under 336.06 where the results of the Iowa acceleration scale are considered that we also are not mentioning that curriculum mastery type of evidence is considered in that section?
If I understand your question correctly, I think the word achievement would cover that.
Okay.
If not, and aptitude.
Okay.
Any other questions? Chris, do you want to just run that back with the comments and questions we had tonight, or move approval on behalf of the committee tonight?
I personally feel like we can move to approval if we add, this is just my own personal opinion, but I would like to see how the other board members feel, if they feel like that needs to go back to policy, or if we can just make a slight change to that and people are comfortable with that. So I don't know if you need me to make a motion to that effect and then discussion after the motion second, or if we can have that discussion now.
We really ought to have a motion technically before we have discussion.
Is the motion
It is not.
So as Chair of Policy, I believe that I'll move to approve the 336 acceleration policy. I guess adding a second paragraph to 336.06, clarifying the process for subject acceleration.
Mr. President, I think since the policy committee adopted this as it is, it wouldn't be in order to bring it forward with a change because the policy committee did not discuss and approve any changes. So if the policy committee is going to bring it forward, I think it would have to be just as it is right now, and then we could separately, after that motion, we could propose amendments to the motion.
Well, either that or the motion from Krista could be a motion to approve with someone seconding it. So either way is fine.
That's point of order.
Yep.
That's what I would clarify, that the motion would be from Ms. Flanagan as a board member, not from the policy committee, which would need a second.
Okay, so the motion on the table is from Krista, that's to approve the acceleration policy as presented with the addition in the future of a paragraph to talk about the procedure for subject matter, yeah. So that would need a second.
I would second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Now we can discuss. Discussion? Dan?
Just so I understand, the motion was to approve it with some addition to 336.06 that's not precisely specified, or what's the addition?
I'll let the movement.
My addition was that when a student is being considered for subject level acceleration, data will be considered by school psychologist, school administrator, parent, and child, which is consistent with other language in this policy.
Did you get that, Janie? Okay, you let me know when you're ready. You all set? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Everybody have in mind what the motion is? Clear on that? All right, and it is any further discussion? Okay, Janie, call the roll.
Ms. Flanagan? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Ms. Oderico? Yes. Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Zak?
Yes. That takes us to reallocating middle school athletics to community services, and that is Dr. Bussler, I believe.
I'm going to ask Mike and Gina and Andy to make the report for the board.
Sure. I guess I'll start. So back on June 12th, we came to you kind of with a conceptual idea a little bit about basically moving middle school athletics, as well as there are some other things in here at the elementary schools. Actually, we didn't find anything at Rome Corners, but things that are not necessarily connected to our educational program per se, but are, and then could therefore be community education fundable. The rationale for that, the main rationale, is if we can remove those programs from the education fund, then we can provide additional services that cost additional resources, such as transportation, which has been a major thing on our list of things to be able to provide students. And it is a way to basically start providing a little bit more equity for students that otherwise their only way to back home from school would be through the bus. If the buses leave at 3 or 3:30, then there's no real way for them to participate in activities. And so the idea is by moving these activities, then we could add additional late busing for these activities, as well as provide perhaps additional activities after school as a way for these students to have opportunities outside the school day to further their interest in whatever those things are. We don't have a list of those things right now. Right now, all we're proposing is kind of the late activity bus situation. Although we do have some activities that I think right now aren't compensated that we may look to provide compensation so that they can be more structured and have more of a club feel to them, so to speak. So with that said, I have two other folks that maybe want to jump in and add, or maybe not. Okay. So the last time we met, I think one of the main questions that we got from the Board of Education was that maybe a little bit more detail. I thought about putting a spreadsheet on here with all the positions, but it had people's names in it and everything. So I kind of just provided a little summary identifying all the different activities that we're talking about. And we're talking about basically $74,500 to fund those activities this last year. That would leave a gap of $30,000 to $40,000 for busing for this year, as well as maybe an extra activity or two that we want to provide. So I guess we're back at that point where we're wondering if you have additional questions or any other thoughts.
Andy, does that identify activities that occurred immediately following the regular school day? And does that have to be clarified at all? So that we don't move into activities that start at 6 p.m. in the evening and require some busing?
That's a good point. Yeah, all these activities start right after the school day, and we could very well put that in the motion or whatever. It wouldn't have to be, but then you're running into the situation that you just talked about is then, okay, now we've got the same situation we have now is the kids don't have a way to get home.
Any other questions? Krista?
Just a couple clarifying. When you say this translates into a 0.05 or 0.06 levy rate increase, is that 0.05%? Is that what you're saying?
It'd be 5 or 6 cents per hundred,
Okay.
per thousand, I'm sorry, of assessed value, yes.
Okay. Then my second question is, are we, as we put this in this document, are we restricted to funding these things which you state? Or can we use this money if we do a survey research and we determine that the barrier is not transportation, it's something else, do we have to use this money for transportation, or can it be used for something that's a community ed activity for these things?
I believe it could be used for other things. I think we'd probably, like we brought this to you, would want to come back to you.
Okay.
Just to make sure that, but you as the Board of Education have the ultimate authority to use these funds.
Okay. And then my last question is, what is the furthest date by which this can be approved for a levy increase that works for the 17-18 school year? So what is our time crunch here?
Sure. The latest date that you can increase the levy would be at the end of October, but sports and activities start fairly soon after the beginning of the school year for middle school. I think it's the first week or two. So if we're going to provide those types of things, we'd like to have a little bit of lead time to figure out how we collect that information and set up the bus routes.
Okay.
Any other, Barb?
The activities that are going on right now, are they for the most part, ending at the same time?
I think for the most part, I'm looking at other folks, and Shannon's not here, but I believe that's pretty close, and there would be obviously an intent to do that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Dan?
If we did this would the move need to be permanent, or could we bring it back under another part of the budget, or put it back where it was?
Wouldn't be permanent. I would say that it may be more difficult to move it back into the education fund just because the dollars are competing with things a little bit more it's more of a competition for those Fund $10 than for Fund $80. So there's a list of things that would be competing with it that we might have to stop if we were to move it back, but there's nothing that would preclude us from doing that legally.
Krista?
I just have one more question for Mike. Mike, do you see this dovetailing at all with the Youth Sports and Athletics Task Force in terms of a survey research in terms of what are reasons kids aren't participating, or how does this flow into high school, and what could be the impact if we're starting a activity bus for middle school? How can we then move that into high school if that's a need?
I think it's something that we can look at. I think it gives us the flexibility to look at that. Right now, we don't have the flexibility to do that. And I think to answer your other question is, if we can get this approved, if it gets approved earlier, we can then publicize it starting in this week. So we have people that will have access to it.
Well, if we prove it, what are we approving? I mean, what are you going to notice?
Would you be modeling this after the summer school transportation piece? Because, you know, if you've got one kid from North Fitchburg participating and a kid from Brooklyn, that's 2 buses in my mind. So is the model similar to the summer school bus?
I think it'd be similar. It might not be exact. There might be more house-to-house type delivery when we're out into the country areas, where right now the summer school transportation is 2 buses and they kind of go opposite directions, and we have common pickup areas. I think as we get into this, you know, it's dark at 5:30 in the winter. We'll probably be doing more house-to-house drop-offs, but probably again at least 2 buses. And it is hard for me to envision this and cost this out right now because I just don't know the participation level. And I think this would be a little bit of a pilot year to kind of feel that out and see what we got going on. But absolutely, kind of in the back of my head, it's 2 buses kind of going in different directions, and just because we're kind of a long district.
That was my question, is what is the transportation plan and what is the cost? Because when I asked for some information, if we're increasing district residents' taxes by moving this to Fund 80, I want to know why it is we're doing that and what specifically is the need and why we can't fit that in regular budget. I mean, because that will be a question we will be asked.
Yeah, I can't really tell you until I have people, because of the nature of this, is that it will be more of a kind of house-to-house transportation system. So I wished I had the answer to you, but I just don't know how many kids are going to partake in this.
So if the transportation is directly related to Fund 80 activities, why can't we just use Fund 80 for the transportation costs and not shift when we figure them out, and not just set a placeholder in that and not move over all those other activities into Fund 80? Because one of the questions I have is, how do we justify the fact that these aren't in Fund 80 now, and all of a sudden they become Fund 80 expenses to the taxpayer? Number 2, how do we explain to the taxpayer that we're going to fund music and vocal transportation for elementary schools and sports at the middle school and not at the high school? What's our answer to that if we're asked those questions?
I actually have a better answer to the second one than the first one, and now I've forgotten the first question. Sorry about that. Could you mention it again?
The first question is, we've been funding these activities out of regular budget forever. And we've done that, and somewhat contrary to earlier comments, that because we do view extracurricular activities as curricular activities, directly tied to the curriculum, which is why we don't charge fees for high school sports, because we view them as curricular, and the rationale's always been that that's part of our free and public education. This seems to me to be a fundamental philosophical shift to me. If I move them out of the budget into Fund 80, I have now made a shift in my mind in terms of their relationship to the curriculum. And then if I get there, the next question is, then why don't we just start charging fees?
Okay, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I think one of the things that you had mentioned before is, could we just keep busing in Fund 80 and leave these other things in Fund 10? And I'd be looking for help from my colleague Gina on this, but in my mind, I had thought that in order to provide transportation, the transportation has to directly be related to a community ed activity. And so that's why we're moving those activities out of Fund 10 into Fund 80, so that they're funded through Fund 80. So then there's a connection there.
Why wouldn't we then just fund transportation through Fund 82, since there's a direct connection? I mean,
We would. That's the plan, is use Fund 80 to provide the transportation.
okay. Yeah, I know, but we're going to be funding out of Fund 80 the actual costs of the programs and the transportation, right? So what are the other funds going to be used for? Non-Fund 80 stuff, right? What is it?
So that was actually, I don't know all the answers to that. Basically, we're viewing that as kind of general purpose revenues. So those things that weren't spent would be put in the Fund 10 budget and could be used for whatever. Your second question originally, though, has had me thinking, and I think us thinking, that if we have some room in Fund 10 when everything's all said and done, partially because of this move, that providing 9-12 busing through Fund 10, because those activities are not moving to Fund 80, would be a possibility that we could provide. I can't promise it now until the budget's kind of done, but we could provide at the high school level then busing for those activities that are still being provided from Fund 10. We could provide a late bus for those activities as well. A little bit more difficult because at the high school level, everything doesn't start right at the end of school day. It gets muddy. Even with our extra facilities, there's probably going to be a second wave of activities that are going to happen. So doesn't mean maybe we have 2 waves of buses go out. We have to evaluate that. We haven't done that yet, but that is a possibility.
Okay. I just have a couple of comments to add to that in terms of the co-curricular. So something like music at the elementary level, and if you wanted to remove that, you certainly could. I think the thinking was that, at least in my experience, parents whose children are not enrolled in our school district, maybe they're homeschooled or maybe they're private schooled, they ask to participate in things like choir and our music programs at the elementary level. So this would be a way that we could include them in a less formal way. There's a formal process that we go through now to include them, but it's not as tied to the curriculum as it is at the upper levels. It doesn't mean it's not a learning experience for our students. So if you wanted to remove that, we certainly could. Our thinking was that at the elementary level, that's just where we get people who aren't enrolled here that want to participate. So we wanted to give that opportunity on a more community ed basis to members of our community. In addition, if you look at something like forensics, which is something that I did, it's obviously a learning experience, and I think it's one of the best things that I did in middle school or in high school. We did a pilot last year. We had 2 teachers that agreed to do that, and Amy Miller agreed to fund it out of her advanced learning budget, and it was really popular. And so this would be a way to allow that to continue and even open that up to more students who aren't part of our school district. So while it's a learning experience, forensics isn't tied to a certain class. So, for example, you're not at a disadvantage to participate in forensics because you don't take a class. We don't have a forensics class. same as Science Olympiad, is it's much more expansive than our science curriculum. So you wouldn't be at a disadvantage if, let's say, you went to Queen of Peace and you wanted to participate in Science Olympiad because they didn't have that. It isn't like you would be at a disadvantage because you weren't part of a science class. It's over and above that. So it's not that it isn't co-curricular in the sense that it's not learning. It's just not tied to the curriculum where other students wouldn't feel welcome to participate. So we really went through our activities to see what do community members ask us to participate in who may not be enrolled here, and what are some ways that we could make it more of a community ed feel, where you're not at a disadvantage because you're not in class. And it's something we've looked at too, like art club, math club. Are those really an extension of the classroom, or are they going, over and above? And so that's how we came up with the list that we did to propose to you. The other thing that we've looked at, and I don't know if Amy has drawn a conclusion yet, but we have a very successful program at Prairie View called Spark, and she was looking at expanding that to Brooklyn. So this would be a potential funding source for that as well. If the data comes back and says, yes, this has been really successful, we should look at expanding that. And I don't know, because I was gone last week, if you had discussions with her about that for this proposal.
That's almost outside of this proposal. She was going to evaluate that separate.
And then the other thing that I wanted to add is that anecdotally, we really see a need for this. Legally, we're not required to pay for transportation for foster kids or kids who are homeless after activities, but we do that because we think it's really important for engagement. And so, Mike and Andy and I have worked on this, that we do have kids that we think would not traditionally be able to participate, but for us paying for a cab after these activities. And those are just the families that are connected enough to reach out to us. So we know that there is a need for our, at least some of our students to have transportation after activities. And we are told by social workers that we work with that if we don't pay for transportation, they won't participate. And so when we've had, at least probably a dozen families that we've worked with in one way or another to provide transportation, who are living in various hotels or foster care.
Is there any way to know how these programs might expand? Because having been involved in homeschooling for one of my kids for a few years, there's a community that's out there that's just hungry for activities and ways to learn and do this kind of stuff, as well as parochial school students. Do we know in any way whether this is going to cause the programs to really bloom so that we'll have to throw more money at them?
I would just echo that we definitely have an interest from our families. Right now, most of our families choose to take 1 or 2 courses with us because they're allowed to do that by law. And those courses tend to be our music, our orchestra, our band, our drama classes, art classes, and physical education.
I think,
So
I think we have had students, though, participate in our extracurriculars that were homeschooled, right, or not? Yeah. So my thinking is might get a little bit more, but, we've been real open with those communities anyhow, so the ones that want to participate do.
This will also give us another vehicle to reach those people through community ed, which is a way that we've reached them in the past.
The dollar amount that's itemized is approximately $75,000. Is that would be moved into Fund 80? Is there additional monies that are going into Fund 80 that are going to be levied on top of that?
Yeah, the original board item, I think, talked about 120 to 130,000, and I included that, or 100 to 120,000, I'm sorry. That was on the original item and is included in the second part of this agenda item. So that's going to pay for the transportation, because that's not in that 75,000. The 75,000 is basically just salaries associated with folks that are would be moved. And then there is a little bit additional, and I thought of this as I was talking before. I think the middle school athletic budget is somewhere in the range of $10,000. That pays for officials, transportation to events, those types of things. So there's a part of that in there as well. But that would be our estimate is between 100 and 120,000 this next year.
Well, when will we know that? When will the estimate not be an estimate? Because we're going to have to levy that.
Yep, we would obviously have to have that nailed down by October, so that we can put that in our budget estimates and those types of things. I think if we got the information out, we could, that this was a possibility, and start collecting interest from our families. I would hope that we would have a solid number on that. We'd have obviously the pilot program going on in September, that we could kind of extrapolate that for the rest of the year.
Have we surveyed our community to determine if we did a late bus at both the lower levels and at the high school, how many would do that? And I preface that with the fact that we're having extensive discussions at Visioning about this very topic, about busing and late bus, and this seems to kind of be colliding with that.
I'm not aware of a formal survey that we've completed, but maybe the schools or somebody else has. I'm not sure.
I would say the majority of the information that we've gotten from Shannon Anderson at the middle school is kids aren't participating because they don't have transportation home. And she didn't give us a number, but she said it was definitely a need.
Well, the other thing that we talked about is that if the board approves this tonight, that we would have a registration process for these activities through community ed. And that would be one of the questions when parents register. So they would register online or at registration. And that would be a question, is if they would be interested in having transportation, so that we could generate a list by mid-October and see how many kids we have and who's interested. The one drawback to doing a survey, and happy to do that, is that some of the families we're trying to reach aren't traditionally the families that participate in a survey, at least the way we've done them in the past. So we're always looking for new ways to do that, and hopefully our Director of Communications will help us reach families that aren't as engaged as we would like them to be.
My one question regarding that is kind of what I said earlier, that I would be a little concerned if our survey is just directed to transportation, because although, you know, as Friends of Oregon School District, we did listening sessions at every building, and transportation was a top 4 concern. But do we know for sure that is it could be the top barrier, but is it the barrier? Is it the barrier, or are there other reasons that homeschoolers, students of color, students of low income, that they're not participating? So I would hate to see us assume that that is the reason, and we're going to get all these people participating when there's another barrier, potentially. So the question for me is, do we jump in and get data? Or do we say, let's get the data and then jump in? I mean, I'm all for piloting, because I think it's a need, and I think you all know that transportation is the issue, but I would like to see us gather more information for sure.
I think one of the concerns that we have is to make sure that this feels clean, that these are community ed programs and not general ed programs, is we had this interest to kind of had this done a little bit differently, so that there was this clear distinction, so that there wouldn't be any challenges to what we're doing. What's going through my head right now and listening to the discussion is perhaps what we want to do, to go back to Dan's point, is not allocate those additional funds that would be freed up, so that if you were to approve this tonight, we use Fund 80 to go forward like this, but don't use those dollars so that if we need to backtrack or do something different, it's not competing against something else that's already taken its place, if that makes sense. That would be a path forward, perhaps. I'll just offer that. So if we move these funds to Fund 80, the activities to Fund 80s, then the question, I think, is, with what Dan's question was a while ago, is and then we start using those Fund $10 for something else, the problem's going to be moving backwards. And at that point in time, we're going to look at you and say, okay, what in Fund 10 do you not want to do now? If we didn't allocate those Fund $10 to something, at least originally, you know, let's get some data or whatever, then we'd have the ability to move back if we wanted to.
And then it still comes back to that philosophical question about whether or not, for instance, athletics are part of the education process, not just a community ed program.
Well, that, and then what, and Andy raised this, what is the transaction cost for not doing this? What if we do this, if we think that it's important to provide the transportation for the students, and that has a dollar cost, what's that dollar value? And where does that fit in our prioritization scheme with Fund 10? I don't know the answer to that tonight. I don't know if I have to vote on this, I don't know what I'm giving up to say yes, or just increase taxes.
Is it possible to, I mean, it sounds a little like a chicken and an egg, like we don't know how much it's going to cost until we get people registered. Is it possible to wait on this decision and go through registration in August and have collect that data through people registering for activities and then make a decision once we have that data?
When Gina and I were talking about this, we wanted to make this real clean, that it was either community ed, and so we were even having, Amy was going to run the registrations for these types of things. So that's why we're kind of pushing now, is we need to set those things up now, whether it was community ed or not. So it is a chicken or the egg type of thing, is kind of where we're caught at this point in time. I don't know if Gina has any ideas.
I'm sure that we could figure that out if that's what you wanted us to do. Just because we say it's community ed doesn't mean we'd have to fund it with community ed. I'm just trying to think it through, and I was thinking if we have 3 students sign up for a late bus, I don't think we run a bus. Then we'd probably come back to you, in September and say this was our interest level. So, I think it's sort of like, I guess the difference is if we advertise as community ed, we can always pull back. But if we use Fund 10 money, then we can't open it up to other community members. So if it stays middle school athletic, then it's for children enrolled in Oregon, absent like homeschooling or some other rules. So I think it's just we have to decide one way or the other for a funding purpose. And I don't know when you need to know that, Andy. So I think it's more, we want, from a parent perspective or a guardian perspective, we want it to seem the same, right? Or maybe even easier. Like I will say, like I signed up for swimming lessons through our new community ed registration, easy. We'd like to have it easy at registration for our new families or our families that need paper. So we want to make it easy for our families, so I think we just have to think it through. But I think whatever you tell us to do, we'll figure that out.
Any other questions or clarification? Else we're getting to the point where someone's going to have to make a motion.
Just one quick thought, and that is, it doesn't trouble me too much to think about moving this to community ed and moving it out of the formal curriculum. My only concern is, I think it's a great idea to offer transportation, and my only concern is what if we try it and it just proves to be kind of logistically horrible. And so I'm just asking the question, is it feasible to, if we go ahead, call it the transportation part of it a pilot project for the first year and see how it goes and see if it's feasible to continue?
So it isn't that clean process, that clean cut. That pilot process is, it is. It's trying to steal second base without taking your foot off at first, is what it is. And if we just clear about it, if we're just clear about the fact that it's a pilot, we need to see what happens, because people are going to ask, you're levying money, what's the objective? And it's like building it and they will come. The taxpayers have a hard time swallowing that. So it's just going to be messy the first year until we prove it out.
Can I just ask one more question, which is, my understanding now, based on this discussion, is there's sort of two goals with moving this. One goal is to make these programs accessible to kids who are not necessarily enrolled in our schools as students. They are district residents, they may be homeschooled, whatever. The second goal is to remove barriers for kids who are students who may not be participating, right? So there's sort of two things happening here. And the second piece is kind of the piece that we don't know much about, but to achieve the first goal, we would need to vote to approve the movement of these activities into Fund 80, which is community ed, right? Okay. Okay, thank you.
This is still question clarification time. Any more of those type of questions? If we don't have any more of those, then to continue the discussion, I need a motion on the table.
Can I ask one more question? I just thought of it.
Yes, you can.
Pursuant to making a motion, would the motion need to include a dollar number? Would it need to include the $100,000 to $120,000 level?
I think you're going to have to
Yes.
because you're going to be levying that. What it is you're exceeding the revenue limit by moving it into Fund 80, so it's really adding on
Okay.
to the tax, and I think we need to have that specifically. Yes, sir.
This isn't a question, this is a comment. We certainly don't want to do something that the board is questioning, doesn't feel like we have all the answers to it. Our main objective was to fix what we thought was a challenge with barriers. And this was an opportunity to do that. If you'd like to send it back to us for additional research, we can. We're always reluctant to do a survey and to create an expectation and then turn around and say, well, we can't do that. So there is a little chicken and an egg thing, but we'll pass on this item. As I read the board's faces, there's a level of uncomfortability, and we can come back with more information if you'd like. Our next board meeting is August 14th. It's still before school starts. We'd have to move quickly during the month of August, but I do not want you to approve something if you are not fully comfortable, because there is no two ways around it. We are moving money from one fund to another fund that's going to increase the taxes for taxpayers. No way, we're not trying to hide that. We're trying to be very upfront about that. It moves money and creates more budget capacity. And if that creates heartburn, then you should send us back to the drawing board, get us questions in the next couple of weeks, and we can do our best to answer those questions in August 14th. And if you tell us, no, this is just something we don't want to do for philosophical reasons, we're off to the next project, because we got a ton of projects to work on too. I hope that came across encouraging, because that's how I intended it.
Board members, if there's somebody who wants to make the motion, it's certainly now's the time to make the motion, and the absence of a motion won't be construed as being opposed to this. It would probably be a signal that we need to mull this over a little bit more and have some answers. I'd rather have a vote when everybody's got comfortability with the issue and think about it a little bit more in light of tonight's discussion, and maybe ask a few more questions. So, is there anybody at this time ready to jump on a motion to approve this? I don't see that. So I think what Brian and I will do is if you could siphon to me any questions that you have regarding this, additional, and Brian and I will sit down and talk through about how we address this in August. Because what I'm hearing is we're not opposed to the notion of removing barriers or providing this type of service. In fact, we've been talking about it at the visioning committee of doing this exact same thing. So let's sift it a little bit so that we got a comfort level. I'd rather do that than to take a vote and have a motion and vote it down, and then it's hard to resurrect it at that point. Because I think there's a potential path forward on it. Okay? Great. Thanks, Andy and Gina and Mike. Don't take the comments and questions tonight as a negative. It's just we're processing in our role as board members to wrap our heads around this. Okay. Next agenda item is committee reports. Krista?
Our next
Policy?
policy committee meeting is in August, early August 8th.
And Jeff is on vacation right now. Vision Steering Committee, we're set for
We are set for the 19th.
of July, and the topic of that is
There are two topics. One is transportation, and the second topic is feedback for the growth task force.
great. Moving to agenda item F, staffing update, and that's yours, Brian.
Janie, would you distribute the green document? Board members, what you'll recall, we had 3 positions on what we identified as the watch list with our staffing proposal. And our recommendation, or actually we were to report back to you what our game plan was. And our plan is I'll ask you to turn to page 2 first. And at the top of the page is RCI, and you can see it says 5th and 6th grade. We currently have 11 sections of 5th graders at RCI. 11 sections would yield about 28 students per section, and we have posted a position, a 5th grade position, which would bring us to 12 sections and bring the 5th grade to 24 students per section. So our plan is to move forward with that, but we did not want to do that until we came back and gave you an update. I should have also provided as an informational background. I know you've heard us refer to Katie Heights. Katie is our district registrar, among other things, and Katie put this together for us today. And if you look at the first page, this is class sizes. This is actual students in classrooms today. You can see at kindergarten we are in really great shape. We're under our 22. At Netherwood, we have 5 sections of 19. So right now at kindergarten, we are 24 students. We have 24 available seats. In 1st grade, we are 3 students over. In 2nd grade, we are 1 student over. 3rd grade, we're 6 under. And 4th grade, we are 36 under right now. And part of that is because our class sizes at 4th grade are larger. What we're thinking is we would keep that 1st grade position. We had allocated one in the budget. We'd keep that 1st grade position open for the rest of the month and take a look in early August. I don't know that we can wait until the August 14th board meeting because we have to set up classes in 1st grade. So if we see an uptick in 1st grade, we'd fill that position between now and August 14th. I don't think we're going to see that in second grade. And this was a conversation I had with Katie, who spends more time reviewing class sizes than anyone in the district. So we're clearly a go with fifth grade, just to recap for you. We're clearly a go with fifth grade because we're there and we don't want class sizes at 28. At first grade, we're going to watch till the end of the month, and we may be a go with that. At second grade, we're not going to do anything. So one out of the three positions is a definite go. We may add a second position at the end of the month. So I'm going to stop and see if that's created questions or reactions from any of you.
I'll start over with Barb. Anything coming down this side?
Just at RCI, how are we doing with space with additional sections? Space-wise.
We're good.
Okay.
Courtney? Dan? Keep us updated, Brian, and if numbers change, I know we don't have a meeting set till August 14th, but if we need a staffing meeting between now and then, we certainly have the ability to call a special meeting if need be.
We will keep you.
Yeah. Dan, it came to you, didn't it? Yes. Okay.
I just wanted to know how recruiting was going to fill the positions. Do you feel the heft or the lift?
We're about 2/3 of the way there. We're about 2/3 of the way there, and we just have hired just awesome people. So I think that I feel very fortunate to have this community and the board that supported the referendum, because this market is so competitive. Even the change from last year, that almost every person that I talk to that is our number one person has multiple offers from other school districts. And honestly, without the new teacher compensation system, I don't know how we would compete this year. So I feel really fortunate to have that, and everyone that we talk to says that they just feel really fortunate to have an offer from a community and a board and an administrative staff that's so supportive of educators. So I think we just have hired wonderful people, feel very lucky, and we have about a third more to go. So every year I've been here, this is my 6th hiring season, so to speak, and we've hired, through the end of August. So that's not atypical.
Any other questions? Great, thanks, Brian, and then we'll look forward to keeping updated in the in-betweeners in terms of the numbers. Superintendent's report.
A couple items for you. I was going to bring the Operation Playground Power sign tonight because I thought you all might like one. And that's from our PTO at Brooklyn Elementary School. They have taken on a rather extensive proposal to raise $75,000 to replace playground equipment that was installed in 1994. So just think for a minute what you were doing in 1994. I was significantly younger in 1994. Similar to some of the work that Prairie View is doing, this is a request that came in and we approved it as a fundraiser, and you'll see some community signs throughout the district. I'm usually not a big sign person at home, but I will put this sign in my neighborhood, and the fellow Brooklyn parents will really like seeing that. And of course, we'll check in to see how quickly we are reaching that goal. So I provide that as a piece of information for you. A couple of weeks ago, I reported on Camp Invention, which we had 350 students at RCI for 1 week of summer school. And this young lady, I think she was a first or a second grader, this was a bubble machine. A bubble busting machine. Look at the great little colors. She handed me one and she said, it takes us about 10 minutes to put this together. I think you can do it in 15 minutes. So I was able to break the 15-minute mark by putting together this bubble machine, which is a young person's STEM project. So I will keep that in my office for a while. I have a few pictures that I'm going to email to all of you. Deb Bossingham, our aquatics director, shared a couple of pictures of the splash pad. That's a tough phrase to say really quickly. I'll send these around. We have a local architect who has volunteered his time to work with the group, and these are 3 pictures of what the splash pad could look like. So that project continues to take shape. It's not completely funded yet, so it's not going to be built tomorrow, but you see donations coming in, and it's an exciting project for the community, and will help our Oregon pool better meet the needs of young people. We had 63 students participate in the Career and Technical Education Incentive Grant, and we received over $45,000 for that. 63 students is one of our highest amounts this last school year. I don't know exactly where the numbers are this year. I know Greg Granberg is still recruiting students for that program. You might recall a report that I made on AB 262 to the board, and I shared a picture of our board president testifying in front of the Education Committee. That was a proposal to require schools to return to referendum vote on a recurring referendum every 5 years. You know, we have several referendums that are recurring referendums, and that would have a significant financial impact on us to be required to go back. Steve did a terrific job of sharing that with the Education Committee. Last Friday, I followed up with Dan Rossmiller. He is one of the lobbyists with the School Board Association, and he said, he shared with me, from everything he could tell, AB 262 was dead, and it's not going to be part of the budget. So we hope that continues. We're starting week 3 of summer school this week. It's going to be a full week of summer school. And there were also a couple of other items that we were notified by from the Department of Public Instruction. You may recall the 100-question civics exam. That was part of state law this last year. And the pass rate was at 60 questions, or 60%. There's a proposal in a budget motion to raise that to 80% pass rate. We haven't been told any other information. DPI just screened this through one of their reviews of the state budget. And then they also provided a notice to us on Assembly Bill 280 and its sister bill, Senate Bill 212, that's moving through the state legislature. It would require every school board to adopt academic standards for financial literacy and incorporate instruction on a K-12 basis. This would not be a graduation requirement, but likely this is something that may pass. And of course, we'll find out after the fact, because no one has asked us for input on this piece of state budget. So I'll stop and see if you have any questions on what hopefully was my quick and informative report.
Just one point on AB 262, the gist of my testimony was that by having flexibility in terms of when we, as a board, vote on a resolution for or for construction, we were able to work with our financial advisor to time the market a little bit and to find out when would best time to go, and Andy did that, and we saved probably $15 million on when we went out, or we had the benefit of the market over estimate, whereas if we would have had to wait for the following November, the market wouldn't have been as advantageous to us, and that would have resulted in a long-term greater tax impact on our taxpayers. That seemed to get their eye on that. So, and then we were also able to kind of work with the construction schedule as well. So that was very helpful to that. And thank you, Brian, for accompanying me. It was a long day sitting there listening to some of the testimony. Anyway, okay. Any other questions of Brian? Brian, one question is, or Andy, is the state aid numbers came out, and if I read that right, we are down about 1.5 points of course.
Yeah, state aid is a lot of different things going to that, but basically because our assessed values had been going up so much, we're viewed as more wealthy, property wealthy, so then state aid goes down. The question we don't know is, and usually in August I start projecting that, is what's happening to the assessed values for this year, because that might offset some of that decrease a little bit with new construction.
Right, the impact of the decrease in state aid is that means that we have to pick up those revenues from the property tax, and if we get a greater property tax back, that would minimize that or reverse it a little bit.
Correct.
Okay, good. Okay, I think we'll do future agenda and checkout. We're gonna do a workshop activity, and we may just, given the time, do one of them tonight and then do closed session, Brian. We might just do the 4 Cs. We'll see how we do with timing. But we'll go over into our side room for that, and then we have a quick closed session as well. So let's get here future agenda out of the way, and then we'll take a quick recess and move over. So future agenda, you have, our next meeting is August 14th. We won't meet a second meeting in July, so next one is August 14th. We'll be approaching school, and we may already have a football game in by that time.
The students are
So-
definitely, will definitely be back at school participating in co-curricular activities.
So we'll have Gina bring in some changes to the handbook. And then we have the United Way contract carry over, and then the easement, and then Brian and I will continue to work on,
Then the questions on the Fund 80
Yep, we'll bring
middle
that
school
back.
athletics.
we'll bring that back. And then if anyone has anything else that they'd like placed on the agenda that night, let us know, and we can work through that. Okay. All right. Good. Then let's do checkout then. Barb, Tim, Krista, Courtney, Dan?
Distant cousins. You may have heard a lot about them recently in the newspaper, and they were 4 gentlemen who just graduated from Oregon High School. Ben Lakuta, Sam Meese, Nick Tierman, and Nate Kraus. And they won just all kinds of awards this past year, but most recently they played in the finals on June 30th at Milwaukee Summerfest. And they won once again, the second year in a row, top high school garage band in the state. So we're very proud of them. And they got to play yesterday again, a nice 45-minute show at the Briggs and Stratton stage there at Summerfest. So it's their last year. Of course, they can't enter this anymore because it's high school and middle school students. So you have to have, I think, at least half of your band has to be either high school or middle school students. But it was a great experience for all these guys, and they're looking for more bands for next year. So if you put together a tape or a video, you submit it to the people. Just look up Rock Onsen. That's like Wisconsin, only with rock in front of it. Rock Onsen. They are looking for more bands. So, and there's a space opening up at the top. So best of luck to everybody, and congratulations to our graduates.
Yeah, and congratulations to you, Dan, and you've had a close ride on with that group. It had to be really satisfying and kind of bittersweet too, I imagine, yesterday. So, and to keep with the musical theme, as we meet here tonight, there's a group of 13 down at Prairie View Elementary rehearsing for Sondheim on Sondheim, which I'm producing for the Straw Hat Players, and we will not meet before that show is performed. So this is my chance to publicize that for you guys. It's 30 Sondheim songs told through a video with Stephen Sondheim introducing them. It's beautiful. The cast is terrific, and we're really happy with the way it's going. The shows will be at Prairie View the first weekend, the 4th, the Friday and Saturday night, and then Sunday matinee. Is Dawn here? Yeah. Thank you so much. Dawn and her staff have been more than accommodating to our cast who's rehearsing there. So thanks much. We really look forward to having that venue. And then the following weekend, the Thursday, the 10th, 11th, and 12th, we're going to be at Charlie's on Main, and we're going to be upstairs in the Masonic Hall, which is just a spectacular place to have it. And then we're working with Charlie's. We're going to have a dinner theater option so that for, I think it's $40, you get a 3-course meal at Charlie's down in the main event, and then you go upstairs and watch the show, and then we'll go back down to the speakeasy after and meet the cast. So I'll be emailing all of you with ticket information and opportunities, but it's really going to be a great show. It's some really beautiful music. So, good. Thanks everyone for a really good business meeting. Some hard discussions, some hard questions, but that's what we're supposed to do, and we'll find paths forwards on some stuff. So let's take 5 minutes. We're going to adjourn out when we're in there. We'll just take a recess right now for, let's come back at 8:15. That'll give us 8 minutes, 8:15 in the side room. And I think we're just going to do the 4Cs definition project tonight and save the other one for later. And then we'll have a short closed session regarding a personnel matter. So we're recessed till 8:15. And when we're going to go into closed session, we'll not be coming out into open session. After that, we'll adjourn from close. So we're done. Thank you.